By this time, Kyle was about, well, this was after Christmas, so we were probably coming around to about Easter time. So this would have been 1988 now. Um, and he'd also had scarlet fever actually when he was a bit younger. So they thought maybe the glue ear could have been a result of having scarlet fever. So yeah, they went ahead, and Kyle had to go and have, had to go through the drama of having grommets in hospital, which was really difficult because he screamed the place down and he didn't want anybody touching him. And they gave him a pre-med and he was totally resistant to that. So they said, he won't settle and he won't lie down, he won't lie still for the pre-med. I said, no, I don't think he will. But he had grommets done, and so we ticked that box. But it made not an ounce of difference. It didn't, all of a sudden allow language to kind of start to develop because he could then hear. So, we carried on going down the route of what the educational psychologist was doing with him, and that was lots of assessments. He had lots of assessments on sort of his social interactions, his communication skills, and his imagination. And one of the things that came out and that was very evident at the time was that Kyle lacked imagination, because one of the tests that they gave them was that they sort of they have all these teddies and dollies, and they sit them in a circle, and then they have all these plastic cups and saucers. And Kyle was meant to kind of imaginary sort of have this tea party and sort of have an imaginary drink of tea and give an imaginary drink of tea to Teddy Bear. But all Kyle did was pile the cups and saucers up into a tower and then crashed into them, and into the teddies and the dollies, and they kind of went all flying. And that was, well, Kyle, I think, lacks imagination, which corresponds with having autism. So, so that was kind of really evident to him. And then the fact that there was no eye contact, and he wouldn't socially interact with any of the activities that the ed psych kind of, did with him. And there was no language. I mean, every sort of shred of language that he had before had totally disappeared. So that kind of from his point of view sort of related to the fact that Kyle was then definitely in the realms of being classically autistic. This was just part of the diagnosis because it's in phases. So you have to have an ed psych's diagnosis, and what that did was enabled Kyle then to have a statement, an educational statement put in place. So as soon as he got to a certain age, I think it was 3, he was then eligible to go to a special school that could then accommodate his autism. So that happened quickly, and I was lucky because that's the hardest thing to get once you have got a child that's got autism or any other kind of learning disability, that to get that statement is a long process. So the Army were great, and I'll always be thankful to them for that I didn't have to push. It was available, it happened quickly, and by the time we left Germany and came back to the UK, Kyle had already had his statement in place. It meant that I could find a school for him really quickly. That was the more the educational side of his needs, but he had to have a medical diagnosis as well, which was done by a paediatrician, and we had to come back to the UK for that. And Dr. Christopher Rolls from Southampton General Hospital gave Kyle his final medical diagnosis after a series of EEG tests and blood tests. And Dr. Christopher Rolls, when he sat me down and said, I would agree with the educational psychologist report that Kyle does have autism, as far as he knew at the time. And he said that he didn't think that it was anything to do with genetics. I'd had a Fragile X test done as well, which was it's a buccal smear that you have. They take cells from the side of your mouth to see if you've got a particular chromosome that can cause learning disabilities in boys. I don't think, and it's the mother can carry this over to the boys. So I had that test done as well, and of course that came back clear. So Dr. Christopher Rolls didn't think that it was hereditary. There was no evidence of mental or psychological or illness in the family. So there was no history of autism or any other kind of, schizophrenia or anything like that. So, as far as he was concerned, it was just a one-off. But he definitely felt that Kyle's condition was in line with being classically autistic. He said it was rare, and at the time, I suppose 25, 26 years ago now, it was quite rare, and that there was no known cure. It was a case of just finding the right provisions for Kyle from now until the end of his life, where Kyle would be, it was just finding the right educational support, and then social support, where it would help me and help Kyle in the best way that we can. So, and that was it really. You leave the doctor's room thinking, right, now what?